What are you doing down there?
Alright, so hello everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Ethiopian Worka coffee. So, as you can tell from the name of the coffee, it's from Ethiopia, and the Worka part, it comes from sort of the cooperation that's named Worka. So, this coffee comes from a region in Gedeb, Yirgacheffe. So, sort of along that region, there are around like 6, I think, mini regions. I think they're called Werderas. But other than that, those are just like the two. It's Gedeb and Yirgacheffe. In this region, these coffees, they're sort of known for like their stone fruit, like citrus and floral, and like sweet tasting coffees. So Onyx Coffee Lab, they kind of purchased this from a producer called Snap Coffee. Now they're based in Gedeb, Ethiopia, and that's the main producer behind this Worka coffee. Now Onyx Coffee Lab, I like their transparency in how they purchase coffee. So fair trade, around the time that they purchased it, it was a minimum of $1.60 per pound. So they actually purchased this at $3.54 per pound. So it's a little bit of a higher end cup of coffee, but also making sure that everyone's being paid the correct amount for this good cup of coffee. So the process of this coffee, it's a washed coffee and then also dried on raised beds. It should be a fairly clean cup of coffee. It should definitely bring out those floral and more, I guess, sweeter, cleaner tasting notes from the coffee. So the variety of this coffee, I believe that it's farmed at 2,000 meters. They like to call it an heirloom coffee. So generally what heirlooms are is just the sort of general coffee that's being farmed in that region. And it doesn't technically have a real varietal type, but because it's sort of only known in that or region of farming, it becomes an heirloom. But generally, coffees grown in this area are mostly typicas, as Ethiopia is sort of like the origin of coffee. So typicas are the main type of coffee that's being farmed there, but it's just called an heirloom for now, just as like a blanket statement for most coffees. So the cupping notes for this coffee, they like to say it as a Earl Grey, lemon, blueberry, and cocoa. So for those who are more tea drinkers rather than coffee drinkers, I feel like you'd pretty at home here. It's a very light cup of coffee. I really like the sort of tea-like qualities of it, and it's also pretty sweet. So let's go ahead and start brewing the coffee. Okay, now so for this type of coffee, Onyx Coffee Lab likes to recommend about 14.5 grams per 250 milliliters of coffee. So that's sort of like a good general standard that I like to go by. Usually I would go a little bit lower, but in this case, I usually go around maybe like 15 grams. Let's go measure that out real quick. Yeah, around 15 grams right there.
1, 2, 3, and 4. Count what you have now. Don't count what you don't have. Count what you have now. Don't count what you don't have. Find that you have so much. 頑張りすぎる自分に
Okay, so now that we're having a coffee cool down, I'd like to thank our sponsors. I'm just kidding, we don't have sponsors here. So now that it's properly cooled down, you can really taste more of the lemony flavors. Yeah. And then sort of later on, you start tasting a little bit more of like the blueberry and stone fruit-like qualities of this coffee that this area in Ethiopia is widely known for. Like, it's a very light coffee. I would say a lot of people like to associate coffee with very dark, very bitter, very intense flavors, but when you get to experience more coffees that aren't necessarily the most commercial brands of coffee, you get to really taste a lot of like the very interesting, more complex cup of coffees. And that's what I kind of like to seek out and search out new different flavors of coffee that, you know, you wouldn't expect from coffee. Yeah, it's a very, very sweet cup. Well, sweet in terms of coffee, but yeah. Now, Onyx Coffee Lab likes to encourage a 2-minute and 45-second drip down, but as if I was using 15 grams of coffee instead of the 14.5. As you can see, my scale doesn't go in half grams. It's to the nearest whole gram. I just went to 3 minutes for kind of rounding it out for that full gram. And then sort of like the finish, you start to taste a little bit more of the cocoa flavors and the more traditional tasting of coffee. But overall, it's a very mellow cup of coffee, which I tend to enjoy a lot. You have some of the complex flavors of like the lemons, the citrus, and then like the Earl Grey, black tea sort of flavor notes. But then at the end you get that cocoa taste. It's a nice, very mellow cup of coffee, which is very nice. Well, that's been Ethiopia Worka by Onyx Coffee Lab. Well, take care. See you next video.